President. Mr. President, ordinarily, when I introduce a bill, and you know that doesn't happen all that often around here, I'm very brief in that introduction. But Mr. President, I've now been in this General Assembly for 10 years. This is my 10th session. And I'm afraid that I have introduced a bill in Senate Bill 694 that once again will be completely ignored. But Mr. President, the thing I think people need to understand is that Senate Bill 694 does something very, very simple and something that should have been done a long time ago, and that is, Mr. President, it takes away preferential parking from private entities. And Mr. President, let's not skirt around the issue. What I'm talking about is taking the reserved parking away from the members of the press. Now, I had considered, and my Chief of Staff can tell you this, I had considered maybe holding off on this bill. But Mr. President, this morning, I have 2 disabled veterans that are visiting me at this Capitol. And I'll bet you that most of my colleagues here in the Senate have had disabled members of their community come and visit them. Yet every time we talk about the idea of taking preferential free parking away from a private entity, yes, Mr. President, the press, you know the only thing we hear in this building? It sounds like this: cricket, cricket, cricket. Because nobody's willing to man up or woman up and do the right thing, and that is to say that the disabled members of our community, and particularly, Mr. President, those who have gone and served in harm's way and have been injured in the service of this country, would then have to come to this Capitol and fight like dogs to find a place to park when a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, and I understand some of those members of the press over there are far advanced from there, but when we have healthy, able-bodied members of the press that get to just sashay up to the Capitol and park in the most premium preserved parking spaces we could ever come up with and diddle-daddle right into this Capitol while my constituents, disabled military veterans, have to fight like dogs to find a place to park. Mr. President, it is time for this to stop. And I would like for there to be one senator in this body that could discuss this issue with me privately or publicly and have the gall to stand on behalf of those wonderful members of the press, people with whom I am known to have a great relationship, Mr. President, and justify the fact that we preserve the most preferential parking on this campus for members of the press, while our disabled constituents have to fight like dogs to find a place to park to come visit their representatives and senators. And so what I'm doing right now is I am calling upon my colleagues in this body to think for just a minute about our disabled constituents and whether it is right or it is wrong for us to make them park 2 blocks away when members of the press park right up front on the front row. So I'm asking this General Assembly and specifically this Senate, stand up, man up, woman up, and you know what? Yeah, maybe those people that sit over at that table are going to write something bad about you. Guess what? You'll survive. I have every time. So it's time for us to man up and do something about this, Mr. President. And I'll bet you that our good members of the press will actually join us in this effort and say, you know what? We hadn't thought of it in the past, but actually now that you bring it up to us, we do feel a little bit guilty about the fact that we have such great parking and disabled military veterans, combat veterans, Mr. President, have to park who knows where and struggle their way into this building. I am calling upon this Missouri Senate and in an unlikely move for a guy like me, I am calling upon the members of the press to work with us, Mr. President, hand in hand, and for the press to come out publicly and say that they support this bill. This is going to be a great issue for us to stand together on, Mr. President. I look forward to the passage and ultimate signing into law of Senate Bill 694. Thank you, Mr. President.